Okay, in this lesson we're going to learn how we can start to populate clones across an object surface. So for this lesson we actually have two different scene files that we're going to be using. So this first one is called Lesson 05 Part 1. Now what I'd like to do is take this little orange triangle here, this little orange pyramid, and actually populate this and clone this across this surface that we have here. So we can do that with the use of cloners. So let's just go up to MoGraph, we'll make ourselves a new cloner. Now, I'm going to take my orange pyramid and put this inside my cloner. So you can see now my cloner has taken this little pyramid and stacked it up. Now, instead of actually stacking it up, what I'd like to do is actually clone this across this existing surface. So we can do that by just going into my cloner. Instead of this linear mode, I'm going to pull this down and switch this to an object mode. Now at this point, you can see we have the ability to now plug in some kind of an object that we want to actually clone across. So, I'm going to take my plane, simply click and drag, and drop this into my object. Very nice, and you can see just like that, we have this entire surface that has been covered with these individual little pyramids. Now, if I go up to my display and maybe just turn on a line display, we can actually see that each one of these pyramids has been placed right on a vertex of this surface, that they are actually being cloned across this plane in my case. So we actually have the ability to change that. So instead of a vertex, maybe we want these to be on the edges. And now you can see that it will actually take each one of these pyramids and try to put it right in the middle of an edge on this plane. We can also do something like polygon center. So you can see it'll now put it right in the center of any polygons that we have. Or we could also just maybe distribute this across the surface randomly. So in my case, now you can see it just randomly populates this surface. We can come in and adjust the seed. So maybe we want these to be scattered in a slightly different manner. So we can come in here and adjust that until we find something that we like. We can also control the overall number of pyramids that get placed on this surface. So maybe if we only want 2 pyramids, we can adjust that, or if we want 100 or even more, we can keep adding until we find the number that we want. Now you can see at the moment that these clones are actually aligning themselves to the surface itself. So you can see in these areas where we have these little raised up portions, you can see that these little pyramids are actually angled upward. And where we start to kind of slope downward, you can see that pretty much in every circumstance, these clones are going to try to align themselves to the surface and try to point along that surface. Now, if we want, we could just simply disable that, and now all the clones are just pointed straight up. You can see there's no orientation and no curvature matching to this surface whatsoever. Now, if I turn my clone back on, or turn my alignment back on, let's say maybe we have these clones that are pointing in a certain direction, but really we don't like that. We want them to maybe point upward. Well, we can come in here and choose a different up vector, and come in here and try to adjust that until we find something that we like. Now, we might find ourselves in a situation where really none of these work. And in my case, if I wanted these pyramids to all point upward, really nothing that I choose is going to work. Well, that's okay, because a lot of times we can go back to our cloned objects, and if we still have this left as just a standard Cinema 4D object or a basic primitive, we can come in here and actually change that object's orientation from here. So as we start to change that, that should filter through into the clones as well. So let's say I set my orientation on my pyramid to positive X. Now I go back to my cloner and come in here and try to adjust this until I find something that is going to work for me. Again, in this case, it really doesn't look like a whole lot is happening. So, you just come in and try again. So, if you try positive Z, there we are. Now that's starting to work. Now, if I wanted to maybe move these guys up a little bit, you can see right now we have quite a bit of penetration down at the bottom. I could just come in, disable my fixed clone, back in my cloner, and as we've seen in our earlier lessons, by disabling that, now we have the ability to come back to our actual clone itself and start to move that. So I simply reposition my clone until it's at the right position, and there we are. So now all of these different clones are still aligned to the surface itself, but at this point you can see that they are all pointed at the direction that we want. Now here's what's really nice about this, the fact that this is not just simply stuck to the surface. We can actually use things like deformers and other animation, and you can see even with all of these things applied, stick to the surface. Now, I'm actually animating this plane with a simple random to use these type of random effects and other animation features in one of our later lessons of this course. Just keep in mind that as we start to clone and populate objects across a surface, that they will continue to stick to that surface even with animations and other deformers applied. So really, really nice effects that we can start to get with this. Now, very quickly, I'm going to jump over to my scene file. This is called Lesson 5, Part 2. Now, in this one, I'm going to show you how you can actually take an object and clone it across a curve. Now, for the most part, it's going to be pretty much the same procedure. So we're going to start with a cloner, take my pyramid, and that's the object that I want to clone. So I'll put that into my cloner. Now, in my cloner, again, we'll switch this to object just like we've done before. And in the object, we just simply drop in the spline that we actually want to use. So in my case, I'm going to take this helix, click and drag into my object, and there we are. Now you can see my clone has been populated across this spline. And again, just like before, we have controls over the actual count, so we can dial this up or down. We have a few controls also over the distribution, so count, we can do a step, even, or we could just populate it across any vertices that are existing on this spline. So, a few options to choose from. Now, one of the things that is really nice whenever it comes to working with splines as an object is that you'll notice whenever we drop in some kind of a spline that all of a sudden now we have the additional ability to plug in a rail. Now, a rail we can use as basically a point of orientation. So you'll notice that in this case my pyramids are sort of pointing in sort of random directions. So down here at the bottom you can see they're sort of pointing downward. As we start to get kind of toward the middle, you can see where these pyramids are kind of pointing straight out. And as we get to the top of this helix, they're sort of pointing again outward and to the front. Now, if I were to come into this rail helix that I have, currently I have this set invisible, so we'll just turn that back on. What we can do is actually use an additional spline to control the orientation of any clones. So if I go back to my cloner, I'll take this rail helix, click and drag that into my rail, and now you can see that all of my clones are pointed right at this rail curve. And I could still come in, and if I were to grab that rail and pick it up and move it, you can see where all of my clones continue to point and orient themselves to that spline. So really, really nice effects that we can start to get here, and quite a bit of control as well. Now, an additional feature that we have is maybe instead of just simply pointing my clones at this rail, maybe we could also have the rail control the object's scale. So if I turn on this scale option, you can see that a few of my objects, or a few of my clones here, now seem quite a bit larger. Now if you look very closely, you'll see that actually these objects, their size, you can see a pretty definite relationship between the clone's scale and the actual size of this rail. So essentially, any place where this rail gets close to my clones, you can see the objects or these clones get scaled down really, really teeny tiny. In these places where the rail actually gets further away from my clones, you can see that these clones actually get larger. Now I could come back and maybe just adjust the size of these clones, maybe through my cloner object, go into the transform, and start to bring these guys down a little bit. Maybe 0.6, something like that. There we are, very nice. Okay, so that's a look at how we can start to populate clones either across an object surface or along a spline.